Good evening, my friends, wherever you are right now. Maybe sitting alone in your kitchen with a cup of tea or lying in bed listening to the quiet. I hope tonight finds you safe and a little less lonely. You know, life has a way of surprising us. We chase after love, after comfort, after the feeling of being seen. And sometimes, what we find feels like a gift. It feels warm, almost sacred. But love can be tricky. What shines so brightly at first can slowly turn into something heavy, something that holds us tighter than we ever wanted. That is the story I'm about to share tonight. A letter from someone who thought they had found their forever, only to discover they were living inside a cage built out of sweet words and invisible chains. So let's sit together for a while, let the noise of the day fall away, just you and me and this letter written straight from the heart. And now, let me begin their story. I'm sitting here tonight with the rain tapping softly against my window. The room is dim, just the small glow of the lamp in the corner, casting long shadows across the walls. And as I hold this letter, I can't help but remember the beginning of it all, the first time they met. It was in a little cafe tucked away on a side street. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans mixed with that sweet hint of vanilla from the pastries behind the glass. The bell above the door gave a cheerful ring as they walked in, and there he was, already waiting, smiling in a way that felt warm, safe, almost disarming. They laughed about nothing important. The jukebox that wouldn't work, the way the coffee tasted a little burnt. His laughter rose above the clinking of cups and the murmur of voices, and in that moment the whole room seemed to grow brighter. Looking back now, the writer admits they wanted so badly to believe that this was love, that this was safety, and maybe, just maybe, they ignored the little shadows behind the light. Because sometimes when your heart is starving for love, you take whatever is offered, even if it isn't safe. The mornings in those early days still come back in flashes, sunlight slipping through the blinds, painting thin golden lines across the sheets, the faint whistle of the kettle in the kitchen, the smell of fresh toast and bitter coffee filling the air. And then, arms wrapping around them from behind, a soft voice whispering, "Don't ever leave me." At that time it felt beautiful. It felt like devotion. Those words sank deep like a melody you don't want to stop playing. The writer clung to them, thinking, this must be what love truly is. But little by little the melody changed. The same voice that once soothed became heavier. Questions slipped in. Who are you talking to? Why are you home so late? Still gentle on the surface, almost tender, but underneath, sharp, pressing, controlling. And instead of stepping back, they smiled through it, told themselves it was love, that maybe he just cared too much. But sitting here now, looking back, they see it clearly. Love should never make you feel small or afraid to breathe. Yet that's where they ended up, smiling on the outside, slowly disappearing on the inside. There were days when it all still looked perfect. From the outside, friends would say, "You two are so lucky, you look made for each other." And the writer would smile, nod, and pretend to believe it too. Inside, though, something felt different. The joy of getting a text used to make their heart race. But slowly those messages turned into instructions. Call me right now. Tell me where you are. The sweetness was fading, replaced by a steady drip of control that didn't always sound like control. They remember one evening in particular, the two of them walking down a crowded street, neon signs buzzing overhead, the smell of grilled food drifting from street vendors. He reached for their hand, but instead of warmth, his grip tightened like a lock. Every step felt guided, every glance monitored. What should have been a simple night out suddenly felt like walking with invisible chains. Looking back, they wonder why they didn't say anything then, why they let themselves believe it was care, not power. Maybe it was easier to smile, to stay quiet, because speaking up might mean losing the only love they thought they had. The little things began to pile up. A friend's number deleted from their phone, a favorite dress called too much, invitations to gatherings turned down with excuses they didn't make, and slowly the world around them grew smaller, tighter until it was just the two of them, and his rules. At first it seemed harmless. He'd say, "I just want you to myself," and they would laugh, thinking it was romantic. But over time the laughter died, The walls of that relationship closed in like a room with no windows, no air. They remember sitting at the kitchen table one night. The clock ticked loudly, the smell of dinner still hanging in the air, while his eyes scanned every word they said. It wasn't shouting, it wasn't violence. It was worse in a way. Silence, heavy enough to choke. Control so quiet it felt impossible to fight. And the hardest part? They told themselves this was still love, that real love must always demand sacrifice. But the truth they see now is clearer. Love shouldn't steal your voice, your friends, your world. Love should never make you smaller just to fit into someone else's idea of enough. There was a day when the writer tried to push back just a little. It was summer, the windows open wide, the sound of children playing outside, mixing with the buzz of cicadas. They said they wanted to meet an old friend for lunch, someone they hadn't seen in months. The smile on his face never faded, but his words cut deep. Why do you need anyone else? Don't I give you enough? The room felt small in that instant, the air thick. The laughter outside, so carefree, felt like it belonged to another world entirely. They didn't go to lunch that day. Instead, they stayed home, the two of them sitting in silence, the smell of reheated leftovers filling the kitchen. And in that silence, a piece of themselves disappeared. Looking back, they realize how fear doesn't always come as shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes as a quiet question, framed like love but carrying the weight of a chain. The writer remembers nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling. The glow of the street lamp spilled faint orange light through the curtains, and every sound in the apartment seemed louder than it should have been. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even their own uneven breaths. Beside them, he would sleep peacefully, one arm thrown across their body, heavy like an anchor. At first, that weight felt protective, but over time, it became suffocating. The kind of touch that reminded them they could never really move, not even in their sleep. They thought about leaving many times, thought about packing a bag, about stepping out into the cool night air and never looking back. But the questions always circled in their head. What if he's right? What if no one else will love me? The doubts wrapped tighter than any chain, and fear whispered louder than freedom. And that's when they began to understand. Sometimes the hardest prisons don't have bars at all. They're built inside you, with words you once thought were love. There was one evening that stays burned into the writer's memory. They were walking home together under a sky heavy with clouds, the streetlights flickering like they couldn't decide whether to shine or not. The smell of rain lingered in the air, damp and earthy. He kept asking questions, small ones at first. Who did you see today? How long were you there? But then the questions grew sharper, pressed harder. Every step seemed to echo louder on the wet pavement, like the street itself was listening. The writer felt their chest tighten, a mix of fear and exhaustion. They answered every question, trying to keep the peace, trying not to spark that edge in his voice. And yet, even as they spoke, they realized they were no longer walking freely. Each answer was like handing over another piece of themselves. Later, lying awake that night, they thought about the sound of their own footsteps, how hollow they had seemed. It felt like a warning, one they couldn't admit at the time, that love was slipping into something darker. The walls of their world grew closer without them noticing. A dinner missed with friends here, a family call cut short there. One by one, the doors that connected them to others quietly closed. And each time, he had a reason that sounded so caring. I just don't want you to get tired. I need you here with me. At first, it felt flattering to be wanted so completely, to be the center of someone's world. But then the silence set in. No more laughter shared with friends over coffee, no more evenings spent talking with family until the line went quiet, just the steady tick of the clock on the wall, the hum of the television filling a room that felt smaller every day. The writer remembers looking out the window one night, watching the lights in other apartments across the street. They could see silhouettes moving, hear the faint echo of music or laughter when someone opened a balcony door. And in that moment, they felt the sting of something sharp. They weren't living, they were being kept. And that realization sat heavy, like a stone pressed against the chest. There was a birthday that should have been filled with joy. The writer had planned something simple, a cake from the little bakery down the street, a few candles, maybe a laugh or two shared with friends. But he didn't like the idea of friends being there. Why do you need anyone else? Isn't my company enough? So the cake was eaten in silence, the candles blown out quickly, the wax dripping down onto the plate like tears no one dared to cry. The sound of the fork scraping against the plate was louder than any song could have been. The writer sat there, the sweetness of the cake turning bitter in their mouth, realizing that even birthdays, those moments meant to celebrate life, had been turned into something small, contained, almost invisible. Looking back, they wonder how they let it happen, how they convinced themselves that giving up joy was the price of keeping love. Seasons changed outside, but inside the apartment, time felt frozen. Autumn winds rattled the windows, leaves crunching under the shoes of people passing by. The writer would watch from behind the curtain, listening to the laughter of children kicking piles of leaves, feeling the crisp air only through glass. He said it was safer that way, better to stay and better to be together, just the two of them. The words sounded caring, but the walls around them grew thicker with every excuse. The scent of autumn never touched their skin, the cold never stung their cheeks. Life was lived second-hand, through the sound of footsteps fading down the street. Inside, the air felt heavy. The television murmured endlessly, filling the silence with voices that weren't real, and the writer began to wonder if maybe they had become invisible, a shadow of themselves trapped inside a house that no longer felt like home. The winter came, and with it, long nights that seemed endless. Frost gathered on the window panes, the glass fogging whenever they leaned too close. Outside, people hurried along the snowy sidewalks, bundled in scarves and coats, their voices carrying in little bursts of laughter through the cold air. Inside, the writer sat curled up on the couch, the faint hum of the heater filling the silence. He sat across the room, eyes fixed, questions circling once again. "Who called you earlier? Why didn't you tell me?" The firelight flickered, but instead of warmth, the glow only threw shadows that stretched wide across the walls. The writer remembers holding a mug of tea in their hands, the steam rising, the smell of chamomile sharp in their nose. They clung to it, as if the heat might shield them from the chill of his words. But the truth was harder to face. The cold wasn't outside. It had already settled inside, in the spaces where love used to live. Spring eventually arrived, bright and full outside, yet the writer barely felt it. The world bloomed again, cherry blossoms along the streets, the air carrying the sweet fragrance of flowers, the sound of birds returning after months of silence. But behind their walls, the days remained the same. He still checked their phone, still asked for explanations, still made sure that every step was accounted for. The freedom outside, the colors, the scents, the sounds, all of it felt like a cruel reminder of what they had lost. They would stand by the window, hearing the laughter of children chasing kites in the park nearby, while their own laughter had gone quiet long ago. And deep down, they began to ask themselves, when did love turn into permission? When did caring become surveillance? The questions didn't leave scars on the skin, but they left marks just as deep. Marks that only the heart could feel. There was a night when the writer finally felt the weight of it all pressing too hard. The rain was pouring outside, heavy against the roof, the sound of water rushing through the gutters. They sat at the kitchen table, the overhead light buzzing faintly, casting a pale circle on the worn wood. He asked again, the same question he'd asked so many times before. Where were you? Who were you with? His voice calm, almost sweet, but there was something in his eyes, sharp, unyielding. The writer answered, words stumbling, but deep down they knew it didn't matter. No answer would ever be enough. They remember gripping the edge of the table, the wood cold under their fingertips, trying to ground themselves. The smell of rain drifted in through a crack in the window, mixed with the metallic tang of fear rising in their chest. And in that moment they realized, love should not feel like an interrogation. The silence between them became its own language. Whole evenings passed with nothing but the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, or the creak of the floorboards when someone shifted in their chair. No shouting, no broken dishes, no slammed doors. Just silence so heavy it made the air hard to breathe. The writer remembers sitting on the couch, the television flickering with muted colors, voices spilling from the screen that didn't belong to them. He sat beside them, close enough to touch, yet the distance between their hearts felt like miles. The smell of leftover food lingered in the room, stale and unwanted, just like the laughter that used to fill the space. And in those silent nights, the writer realized something devastating. Sometimes love doesn't leave because it's gone. It leaves because it's been smothered, bit by bit, until there's nothing left to hold onto but emptiness. The writer remembers one afternoon in early summer. The sky outside was bright, kids running down the street with popsicles dripping onto their hands, their laughter echoing in the warm air. Inside, though, the air was heavy. He had found an old message on their phone, just a simple greeting from a friend, nothing more. Yet the questions came again, sharp and endless, like drops of water hitting the same spot on stone. Why didn't you delete this? Do you still talk to them? The writer stood there in the kitchen, the smell of cut fruit still fresh on the counter, the hum of the refrigerator loud in their ears. Their heart pounded so hard it drowned out everything else. And in that moment, they felt it, the fear of being caught for something that wasn't even wrong. Looking back now, they understand that's how control works. It makes you afraid of living your own life. It makes you second-guess every step, every word, until even silence feels dangerous. There was a park they used to love. Big oak trees shading the benches, the sound of leaves rustling whenever the wind passed through. Children would ride bikes down the path, their little bells ringing, and couples would sit side by side sharing quiet moments. But when he came along, that part became off-limits. "Why go out when you have me here?" he would say. At first it seemed harmless, even sweet. But slowly the simple joy of walking beneath the trees, feeling the grass beneath their shoes, smelling the fresh cut of spring, it all slipped away. The writer remembers standing at the window one Sunday afternoon, watching families gather in that very park. They could hear faint music from a radio someone carried, the smell of grilled food drifting on the breeze, and inside they felt an ache so sharp it nearly broke them. Because freedom wasn't far away, it was right outside the glass. And yet they stayed. Stayed because love had convinced them that leaving was betrayal. Stayed because fear whispered louder than hope. There was a night when the writer thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I can't do this anymore. The room was dark except for the glow of a single lamp, its light pooling onto the floor like a spotlight in an empty stage. The sound of rain tapped steady against the window, and the smell of damp earth slipped in through a crack. He was asleep beside them, his breathing slow, steady, almost peaceful, but his arm lay heavy across their chest, more like a chain than an embrace. The writer stared at the ceiling, their heart racing with thoughts they couldn't say out loud. Pack a bag, leave tonight, walk out into the rain and don't look back. But then came the whisper in their head, the one he had planted over time. No one else will love you. No one else will stay. Those words felt louder than the rain, louder than the beating of their heart. And so, they stayed. The days began to blend together, morning light spilling weakly through the blinds, the smell of stale coffee in the air, the hum of the same old television show playing in the background. Time moved forward outside, but inside everything felt paused. He still asked the questions. Where are you going? Who are you talking to? The tone almost casual, like small talk, but always carrying weight. Every answer felt like stepping on glass, careful, measured, afraid of breaking something sharp. The writer remembers standing at the sink, the water running over their hands, the sound rushing louder in their ears as his voice pressed on behind them. They gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady themselves, the scent of dish soap sharp and stinging. And in that moment, they realized this wasn't life, this was survival, and survival is not what love is meant to be. One evening, the writer tried to find their voice. The sun had just set, leaving a faint orange glow on the horizon, the kind that fades too quickly into night. Inside, the smell of dinner lingered in the air. Garlic, onions, the faint bitterness of something left too long on the stove. They gathered their courage and said, I need space. I need to see my friends again. For a moment, the room froze. His smile didn't break, but his eyes hardened. He placed the fork down with a soft plink against the plate, and in that small sound, the writer felt a wave of dread. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice soft, almost gentle. Why would you want anyone else? Isn't my love enough? The words slid across the table like chains, and the writer, heart pounding, felt the walls close in tighter than ever. Later that night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, they realized something chilling. Control doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. The breaking point came quietly, like most things in their story. It wasn't a fight, not a door slammed or a glass shattered. It was a moment of silence so sharp it cut deeper than any scream. They were sitting on the couch, the television flickering with muted colors, the sound of a distant siren wailing through the night air. He asked another question, routine by now. "Who were you talking to on the phone?" And for the first time, the writer didn't answer. They just sat there, staring at the screen, hearing their own heartbeat louder than the siren outside. The silence stretched. His eyes searched their face, waiting, demanding, but they stayed quiet. And in that small rebellion, something inside them sparked, fragile, trembling, but alive. They realized then that Lev had left long ago. What remained was fear dressed as devotion, and no matter how soft the cage, a cage is still a cage. The day they finally stepped outside alone felt unreal. The sky was clear, blue, stretching endlessly, a soft breeze carrying the smell of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. People walked past them, chatting, laughing, carrying groceries, children tugging at their parents' hands. Life was moving. And for the first time in a long time, they felt it too. They had told him they were going to the store, just a simple errand, but as they walked further, every step felt like reclaiming something small but vital. The sound of their own shoes tapping against the pavement, the sunlight warming their skin, the murmur of strangers' voices around them, all of it felt like freedom wrapped in the simplest details. For a moment, they wondered how they had gone so long without this, how they had allowed themselves to live in silence, in shadows. And with every step, they felt the whisper inside growing louder. This is what life is supposed to feel like. But going back home was the hardest part. The moment the key turned in the lock, the air shifted. The apartment smelled the same, faint detergent, last night's dinner still lingering, but it felt heavier, colder. He looked up from his chair, eyes sharp, scanning their face. "Why were you gone so long?" The question cut through the room like a blade. The writer felt their chest tighten, the sound of the door clicking shut behind them, echoing louder than it should. They answered carefully, words chosen like stepping stones across a river. But inside, they knew the truth. Nothing they said would ever be enough. He didn't want explanations, he wanted control. And as they stood there, their heart pounding in their ears, they realized something that both terrified and strengthened them. If they stayed, they would disappear completely. The night that changed everything came without warning. The writer was sitting at the table, the faint smell of coffee still lingering from earlier, the clock ticking loud in the silence. Outside, the wind rattled the window, carrying the sound of a dog barking somewhere down the street. He asked another question, sharp and simple. "Who did you talk to today?" This time the writer's voice cracked. They whispered, "No one," but their eyes gave them away. The flicker of truth, the ache of exhaustion. His silence was louder than any shout. He leaned back in his chair, staring at them, his breathing steady, deliberate. And in that moment, the writer felt something break inside. Not from his control, but from the weight of knowing they couldn't live like this anymore. They excused themselves, went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed. The sheets smelled faintly of detergent, clean but suffocating. Their hands trembled as they thought of the door, the world outside, the possibility of freedom. For the first time, leaving didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like survival. The plan was simple, too simple maybe. A small bag hidden in the closet, important papers folded neatly at the bottom, a few clothes, the bare minimum of a life packed into silence. The writer remembers the night vividly, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzzing of the hallway light, his footsteps pacing in the other room. Every sound felt magnified, like the house itself was holding its breath. They waited until his voice called out, casual, distracted. That was the moment. Heart pounding, they slipped the bag over their shoulder, the zipper's soft rasp sounding louder than thunder. The smell of rain drifted in through the open window, as if the world itself was calling them out. And then, for the first time in years, they opened the door, not to return, but to leave. The air outside was cool, sharp against their skin, their lungs filled with it, and for a heartbeat, they felt alive again. The street was quiet when they stepped out. The pavement was still damp from an earlier rain. glistening under the dim glow of the streetlights. Each step echoed softly, mixing with the distant hum of a passing car. Their bag felt heavy on their shoulder, but their chest, for the first time in years, felt lighter. They walked quickly, glancing over their shoulder, half expecting his shadow to appear behind them. But the only sound was the rhythm of their own footsteps and the whisper of the night breeze against their skin. For the first time, that breeze didn't feel cold. It felt like freedom. The writer paused at the corner, the smell of wet asphalt sharp in the air, the city alive in small ways, a cat darting across the street, a neon sign buzzing faintly, a door slamming shut in the distance. And in that moment they realized something powerful. The world hadn't gone anywhere. It had always been waiting for them to return. They found themselves at the bus station, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting pale shadows on the cracked tiles. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and fried food from a stall nearby. A small group of people waited quietly, some with tired eyes, others lost in their own thoughts. The writer bought a ticket with trembling hands, the paper thin and fragile between their fingers. They sat down on a worn bench, their hearts still racing, ears straining for any sign of footsteps chasing them. But none came. Only the low murmur of voices, the squeak of shoes against the floor, the sound of a bus engine starting somewhere in the dark. These Ilsevtir. When the bus finally pulled in, its brakes hissing, they stepped aboard, the smell of old leather seats and diesel washing over them. They sank into a chair by the window, watching the station blur as the engine roared to life. And as the bus pulled away, carrying them into the unknown, a single thought echoed in their mind: I made it out. The bus rolled through the night, headlights cutting across empty roads. The writer leaned against the window, the cool glass pressing against their temple. Outside, fields stretched endlessly, the faint outlines of trees swaying in the wind. Every bump in the road reminded them they were moving further away, mile by mile, from the place that had held them captive. Inside the bus, the sound of the engine was steady, almost like a lullaby. A child in the back stirred in their sleep, their mother humming softly to calm them. The writer watched, feeling something they hadn't felt in years, the simple peace of being unseen, of being just another passenger among strangers. The smell of diesel clung to the air, mixed with the faint sweetness of candy someone unwrapped a few rows ahead, and for the first time, those small, ordinary details felt like treasures. Freedom wasn't grand or loud, it was quiet. It was the hum of an engine, the sway of the bus, the stars faintly visible through the glass above. Morning crept in slowly, painting the horizon with pale shades of pink and gold. The bus hissed to a stop at a small town station, where the smell of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. The writer stepped off, the ground firm beneath their feet, their bag still heavy, but their heart lighter than it had ever been. They walked down the quiet street, listening to birdsong weaving through the air, mixing with the distant bark of a dog. Every sound felt new, almost overwhelming. Freedom had a sound, and it wasn't silence anymore, it was life. The writer found a bench under a tree, the wood still cool from the night. They sat there breathing deeply, letting the crisp morning air fill their lungs. And in that moment, tears finally came, not from fear this time, but from release. They realized something important. Leaving wasn't just about escaping him, it was about finding themselves again, the person they had lost somewhere between sweet words and invisible chains. In the days that followed, the writer began to piece together a new rhythm. It wasn't easy. There were mornings when the echo of his voice still lingered in their mind, questions looping like a broken record. Where were you? Who were you with? Even in freedom, the old chains rattled quietly in memory. But slowly, life began to fill in the empty spaces. The smell of fresh coffee at a corner cafe, the chatter of strangers sitting near, the sound of pages turning in a bookshop. All of it reminded them that the world was still open, still waiting. They started to laugh again, quietly at first, then louder, until it felt real. They noticed how the sun touched their skin, how the breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, how their own footsteps echoed not with fear, but with possibility. Every detail, every sound, every smell became a small reminder. I'm alive, I'm free. Looking back now, the writer sees their first love for what it truly was, a promise that sparkled at the start but dimmed into control, a cage disguised as devotion. It taught them something painful but also something precious. That love without respect is not love at all. They admit they carry scars, invisible ones, the kind that show up in quiet moments, when trust feels hard, when freedom feels fragile. But those scars also remind them of strength, of the night they chose to walk out, bag on their shoulder, heart pounding, into a world that welcomed them back. And tonight, as they finish this letter, they whisper a truth they wish they had known sooner. Real love will never make you small. Real love will never silence you. And though the first love felt like a cage, stepping out of it was the beginning of becoming whole again. My friends, that was the letter. First love often feels like sunlight, but as we heard tonight, sometimes it can become a cage. And yet, even after years in the dark, there is always a way out, always a chance to return to yourself. If this story touched something in you, please remember, you're not alone. Wanting space, wanting freedom, wanting love that lets you breathe, that is not selfish. That is strength. Thank you for sharing this quiet time with me. I hope these words brought you comfort, or simply the reminder that your story matters too. I'll be here again next time with another letter, another voice in the night. Until then, be gentle with yourself, take care of your heart, and remember, you deserve a love that lets you grow. Good night, my friends, and thank you for listening.